Many people who want to master multiple topics wonder about the exact polymath personality traits they'll need to nurture. I went through the hard work of figuring this out myself, especially while completing my PhD at York University in Toronto. And during those years, I studied a variety of polymaths, both in general because I just had to study a lot of people from the Renaissance and medieval era who accomplished tons and tons of things, but also to reverse engineer a little bit. Like, how did they exactly develop so many skills without simply winding up with dust in their hands due to splitting their focus? And a lot of the times, people think, well, it was a different time, a different era, they didn't have so many interruptions and so forth. And I think it's actually quite the opposite. If you think about just the state of health during medieval and Renaissance era, and that's not even just to think about all parts of the world, people were so focused and concentrated on mere survival that it's really astonishing how much they accomplished in areas of being able to, build amazing buildings, create insanely talented artistic works, write fantastic books, many of which set the foundations for today's computation. And we've talked about that in the past on the Magnetic Memory Method podcast with people who, invented memory wheels that are attributed to being early forms of mental computation that lead to algebra and so forth. And they pushed through so many obstacles that we just simply don't have in our time. We have it pretty easy compared to the past. So my research took me into lots of areas when it comes to what are the personality traits that these people had in order to master multiple topics. And I went into self-improvement, philosophy, my PhD. Ultimately, the dissertation was on the role of friendship. And it didn't take me that long to discover what are the traits of these polymathic people, both in the past and now. And there's something else I discovered that you need to know about in order to make it all work. And all of this is going to be covered on this episode of the Magnetic Memory Method podcast. So if you're interested in the traits you need to nurture so you can become truly polymathic and master many skills, this may be the most important episode of the Magnetic Memory Method podcast you ever listen to. So let's get started. This is Dr. Anthony Mentivier from magneticmemorymethod.com. And you might be wondering, what the heck is this word polymath anyway, if it's new to you? Well, it comes from Greek, and poly means many, and manthenein is to learn. And that means that you can be a polymath without actually having math in your skill set. You want to focus on multiple topics, but math doesn't have to be one of them. Just because it has the sound math in the word, it doesn't necessarily mean that you know math. And that's a problem, because a lot of people will criticize certain people who say, oh, I'm a polymath, and then they'll say, yeah, what about physics? What about math? Can you do that? And it's just like, that's not what the word means. So where does this idea come from anyway, this idea that we're going to master multiple topics? Well, many people say that the idea of mastering several fields arose during the Renaissance and the Enlightenment era, and it certainly exploded in many ways during those eras. But that's just one possible way of looking at it. The term Renaissance man still circulates and certainly is an interesting idea, although we shouldn't focus just on the man part of the equation, because even during the Renaissance and other eras, there were many women who were very learned in many skills and topics. And it's just really, really something that, we need to go through these histories again and again. But frankly, polymathic people have been around for a lot longer than just the Renaissance era and the medieval era. Aristotle was a polymath for sure. Arguably, Alexander the Great, his student, was a polymath. In ancient China, just to take one person, Shen Kuo, he mastered multiple topics during his life. This is between the years 1031 and 1095. He was successful in everything from meteorology and metallurgy to politics and pharmacology. Now, the standards, of course, were different then. These topics were not as advanced or multivariant as they are now, but nonetheless, that person was engaged in mastery during that time at a level that has some characteristics to it that I think still are true today, even if they're a bit more challenging to take on quite so many areas of expertise. So As always, we like to look at some scholars and see what they have to say. And, there's a person named Michael Araki. He said that it's not really the topics themselves that define polymathy. What matters is the breadth, the depth, and the integration. So in other words, a polymath has a comprehensive understanding of multiple topics, but not in a shallow way. There must be depth, and typically this depth is demonstrated through integration. And that integration might be through publishing or through performance, or it may be a variety of things that you could do. But at the end of the day, this is where we have to be careful, because a lot of people are in a state of self-delusion. They either claim to have breadth and depth but have no integration, or they have depth but no breadth. There's different configurations that can be there. And we need to really have a way to test our own ideas of our breadth and our depth and our integration to avoid charlatanism, because it's a big problem in this world, and it's only getting bigger, really. So as we go through the traits that we're going to talk about today, keep in mind that none of them need to be inborn. They don't need to be part of your DNA. There are intelligence and memory studies that have shown that it's possible to rewire the brain. It's possible to teach old dogs new tricks. And even those who have never had any experience in mastering a single topic area or skill, let alone mastering several, you can do it. So if you feel like you're missing any of the traits that we're going to talk about today, don't worry, they can all be developed. And one of the biggest barriers, I think, that people have really is focus, concentration, but also a clear mind. A mind that has enough wide open space or even large enough working memory in order to have space enough to juggle multiple topics. So if you've ever had this specific problem where you can't stick with something, it may be that you need to work with your mind. And I don't know, maybe you've read my book, The Victorious Mind, and you maybe haven't even been able to concentrate on the meditations that are suggested there in order to get the benefits of meditation. So if that's you, you may be excited to know that Victorious Mind Live is happening very soon. And so if you want advanced notification and a guided meditation that will help you start clearing your mind and making your working memory a little bit broader and more expansive so you can juggle multiple topics, go to magneticmemorymethod.com/VML. That's VML for Victorious Mind Live, magneticmemorymethod.com/VML. And you'll get this guided meditation. Whether you have Victorious Mind or not doesn't matter. Whether you're going to join us for the live cohort or not, it doesn't matter. It'll be over 5 weeks, but you can benefit from this free guided meditation that is yours to revisit as many times as you like. It's not available anywhere else except for people who have signaled their interest in at least getting the free meditation. So again, magneticmemorymethod.com/VML for Victorious Mind Live. And I'm very excited to do it. There's a reason why I'm starting to put this cohort into action finally, after thinking about it for quite some time. And I've been influenced by, well, I'll tell you all about that when you go to magneticmemorymethod.com/VML, because it has to do with other memory experts. And yeah, I have to apply my own Victorious Mind attitude in order to think about some of these things that are going on in the memory world right now. And I use my own tools. So I hope to see you there, and I hope that the guided meditation helps you out. And I'm quite confident that it will. It's certainly helped me out. It's science-backed, and it can help you really start to develop these core traits of what it takes to be a polymath. And the first thing that I would suggest that you need to work on is curiosity. Curiosity is so profoundly deep that you can't really control it, and it just gets deeper and deeper and deeper. Now you might be thinking, well, how am I going to make myself get curious? I mean, there's so many boring topics, so many tedious books that have to be read, and I only really have a mild desire to learn as it is. Well, I don't know. I mean, maybe you don't have to be a polymath. That's possible. Not everybody has to master multiple topics. It could be that it's better for you to just master one area and live your life and enjoy it, and leave it to others to have mastery of multiple topics. I mean, you're not really going to miss out on much more than responsibility, because if you're going to have depth and breadth and you're going to integrate it all, you're going to take responsibility for it. So I don't want to let you off the hook that easily, but at the end of the day, like, let's call a spade a spade. You don't have to take any of the paths that will get you to the point of being able to have an ability to engineer your own curiosity. So, you might need to do some exercises if you don't have natural inborn curiosity that make yourself more curious. You can do that through a variety of mental strength exercises. Study grit, and just if you're already thinking, oh, I don't want to study all that stuff, just think about your attitude and go, where does this attitude come from? Is it really mine, or am I conditioned to have an attitude like this? And do a little bit of history. Because if you do a historical analysis of your life, you often will find that actually the way that you respond to things are coming from how your parents responded to things, or how the people around you respond to things. Dismissing obvious exercises and not doing them is often from conditioning, not because of your desire or a lack of desire. And another thing you can do is mind mapping. I've shared many mind mapping ways that you can start to figure out why that you're not doing the things that you want to be doing. And these are on my YouTube channel, etc. There's a mind map exercise for figuring out your fears, your opportunities, and your strengths, and so on. At the end of the day, these are paths you can take. You can take positive visualization paths, etc. But you need to figure out a way to develop your current curiosity, wherever it is, and nurture it so it gets bigger and bigger and better still. Now, I'll give you a personal example that might surprise you. I was told by Harry Lorraine years and years ago, he helped me in the early days when I was starting Magnetic Memory Method, and he said, whatever you do, don't tell them about the memory science. And, it's like, why? Well, if you're going to run a successful memory business, you need to avoid the heavy topics that scare the mass market away from the Magnetic Memory Method Masterclass. And I was shocked by this originally. I mean, who doesn't want to know about science? Is he right? Is he wrong? That's not really the point here. The point is I got really curious about it, and I made myself lean into the curiosity. Because at that time, I love science. Part of my PhD was in the history of science, but I wasn't particularly interested in the memory science. I mean, who cares? They work. They've worked for thousands of years. What do I need to know about primacy effect and recency effect and all these parts of the brain and all that sort of stuff? But I was curious about why he was so dismissive of it, and then I made myself become insatiably curious about memory science, and I'm so glad that I did. Now, to be fair, some of my least successful YouTube videos cover the science of memory. But because I decided to ignore that advice, I've been personally rewarded many times over by what I've learned. And, Lorraine was probably right. From a business perspective, certainly a lot of my competitors wouldn't touch, quote-unquote, memory science keywords for the life of them, because they just know that this is not necessarily going to attract the mass market. Well, they're not polymaths necessarily, and this is a kind of issue that I think all true polymaths will probably have to face at some point in their learning journey. There's a saying that I've heard many times before in many different ways: you can be rich or you can be right. So far, I decided that as much as possible I'm going to be accurate. That's kind of like split the difference. If I'm going to say things about memory, I want to say the things that are demonstrably true and know why they're true. And I created a mind map many years ago with Tony Buzan. Tony was interesting. He said that, one of the memory experts he went to was Harry Lorraine. And I don't know if Lorraine gave him the same advice: stay away from the memory science. Whatever you do, don't talk about memory science. But I think Buzan was also much more on the pro-science spectrum, so to speak. Like, he talks about Restorff effect, he uses those terms, and who knows? But who knows? Maybe Harry Lorraine was giving me advice that he was hoping that I would follow, because maybe he did secretly speak about science, or I was not aware of him speaking about science, and it was the secret of his success. At the end of the day, though, I think that if you want to be a true polymath and have that depth and breadth that integrates with the world at large, you're gonna need to have curiosity for things that are often quite challenging. Heaven forbid they're boring, but I have been rewarded many times over from just getting through boring things and then finding ways to make them more exciting. This is essentially what the magnetic memory method is all about. Oh, you can use a memory palace. Oh, you can use these wild and weird and strange and crazy images just all based on the alphabet, and that will help make information stick more if you do it in particular ways. Bam! It's like going to Disneyland. And the reality is that Disneyland also has Mount Olympus behind it in this particular world of magnetic memory method. But it requires being able to develop and maintain and nurture and grow curiosity. So this is a huge trait. And I'll bet that you are curious about certain things. So whatever you're curious about, whenever that curiosity arises, try to just pause for a second and say, what is this sensation of curiosity? What is it like? Why is it attached to this particular thing in the world? And would I be able to just shift it over to this area of expertise I've always wanted to develop? Whether it's computer programming, or it is aviation, or it's baking, or whatever that you have felt drawn towards, but you somehow haven't been able to get any breadth or depth in that topic to integrate into your life. Just see if you can't just analyze it. Don't try to create a goal around it necessarily at this step. Just try and figure out what is that sensation. And the logic of sensations is really interesting to play around with and be scientific about it. Try to write it out, describe it in clinical terms. And I think you'll learn a great deal and become more curious about yourself as part of the journey. Because when you start to document, then you're going to get more interested in what you're documenting. And this is a huge part of becoming polymathic, is documentation. We'll talk more about that in a minute. The next thing that I would suggest is the trait of being interdisciplinary. But I would add that these days we need to be interdisciplinary with more scientific intent. So when I started my PhD in humanities, the exact nature of the program was unclear. I entered the very first year of the program's existence, and I was, in fact, the first person to graduate. And to this day, the exact definition is mostly left up to the individual graduate student, which has its pros and cons. At least that's how it seems to me. I was visiting today the graduate program and found my profile and was looking at some of the other people who have graduated since, and just some of the program guidelines. And it does seem that whatever humanities means is a little bit left up to the student to determine. And I think that's really cool, but there are some cons to it, because I've always had to, people say, oh, you got a PhD in humanities. Well, what does that mean? And fortunately it did have some foundations. So for example, there were course requirements, and early on when I just jumped deep into my courses to get them done as complete and as fully and quickly as possible, I went into history of science, classical languages, and the history of religion. And science was my favorite of these topics. So when I started studying for my field exams after the coursework, I decided I would use science as my lens for everything. And I've traveled the world as part of my ongoing research, both when I was in school and after, and I've continued to use a scientific foundation. And this focus has just been so tremendously rewarding. I can't really even say all the ways that it's been rewarding to use science as a lens. And I'm certainly aware of the criticisms of science. And I myself am a critic of how a lot of science has been playing out in recent years and even previous to recent years. But still, that doesn't mean you can't use the tool of empiricism that underlies science, which is basically, we're going to make a statement about the world. How are we going to demonstrate that the statement is valid? Not true, and not prove that it's true, or even prove that it's valid. How are we going to demonstrate its validity? And that lens is, I think, a cornerstone of what a true polymath has to have in order to be taken seriously and to develop the ability to integrate the depth and breadth that comes from studying topics to a level of mastery. You have to be fair, intellectually honest about what you're doing, and you have to have some sort of empirical scientific apparatus that you're aware of, but you're also aware of its limitations. So ultimately, I wrote my dissertation on friendship. I talked a lot about how friendships appear in movies and TV shows. I crafted a bit of a philosophy of friendship that I no longer quite agree with myself back then, but back then and now, my conclusions about what friendship is scientifically guided. And one of the things that I did is I combined reader response theory with market analysis to guide my conclusions. And I needed to understand what reader response theory was. I needed to understand what the market is. And, this helped temper some of my wilder philosophical questions and my conclusions with what data actually said. And, to make that a little bit more clear, if I'm going to look at movies that feature friendship and I'm going to infer conclusions about how that we as a society or a bunch of societies around the world think about friendship, I better have some means of deciding why these movies are actually worth concluding from or inferring from, right? And so that's what I mean by market data. And I'd actually started earlier in my first MA because I wrote about novelizations, which are, those books that are written to accompany a movie. So it's not a movie that's based on a novel, but it's a novel that's based on the movie. And that was one of my first deep dives into how both the cinematic and the literary market operate and what are the market conditions that allow for those kinds of products to appear and have synergy with posters and t-shirts and soundtracks and all the things. So like even cups at McDonald's, I would look at when movies were released and McDonald's would have tie-in products. I was deep into that stuff. That's science. That's saying, if we're going to take this movie seriously, it's because it succeeded in the market. It made this much money at the box office. It was acknowledged by these many critics. These are the things that the critics said about it. These are what the fans said about it. And that was one of the things that I had to deal with in my dissertation was, how are you deciding that your foundational philosophy here has any merit and so forth? And what is the science in the market that you're really talking about? And I said, listen, if a movie is put out onto the market and it fails, then the hypothesis of the movie obviously was wrong. They did not demonstrate or validate the proposition that the movie was going to succeed in the market. So the scientific experiment failed. But if it did succeed in the market, it doesn't mean that it was necessarily good, or you and I would agree that a bad movie is good or a good movie is bad. But something succeeded in the market, and that's a clue. That's an indicator. So rather than just wax messianic on all kinds of obscure movies, and believe me, I knew at the time many, many obscure movies, but I didn't want to talk about those because I couldn't really make a foundational argument. They hadn't reached enough people en masse to say that, somehow the deeper unconscious cultural mind somehow, was not only able to successfully launch it on the market, but that enough people saw it and reacted to it in order for me to draw certain conclusions about what the critics said, et cetera, et cetera. So that's a long way of saying that I think that the depth and the breadth that got integrated in my work, both then and to this day, I still incorporate ideas about friendship in what I do today. It's all based on curiosity, but curiosity that is interdisciplinary with scientific intent. So the interdisciplinary skill includes science. That is a trait that some people have and others do not. And you probably already have something like it. So you just need to find it, nurture it, amplify it, right? Think critically, think scientifically, develop scientific literacy. Even if you're a person who has certain beliefs and ideas and so forth, by all means, keep them. I mean, why not? But think scientifically and critically about them, because chances are that just developing that skill on its own will make you have broader depth and breadth and integration of your own ideas that you have now. And you won't be so precious about them, which is part of the huge mess that the world is constantly in, is that people are so damn precious about their ideas and they haven't thought for 5 minutes about where those ideas came from. They're usually conditioned into you because of where you're born, when you were born, and on and on and on. So things that are true because they're true, not because of who said them. And that's what science can do for us. This is what St. Augustine had in his theory of memory. It's what Giordano Bruno had in his theory of memory. All these people that we talk about on the Magnetic Memory Method podcast, they were all scientifically minded. But what science was at their time was a little bit different than it is now. I would say we've never been living at a better time for scientific thinking. And or critical thinking, as you please. I think critical thinking, when it's true critical thinking, is empirical. It is guided by the idea that we make statements about the world and then we provide or produce or find evidence that confirms or denies the validity. It's not that we prove anything, but we demonstrate the validity. And that's just a great position to operate on, don't you think? I think it's wonderful, and I wish that more people did it. So, what's another trait? A trait that I think is just a must is adaptability. Humans have many, many, many memory biases. It is unbelievable how many that we have. And our scientific approaches don't always pan out. They don't always help us identify what they are and remove them. The day I'm recording, Daniel Kahneman has passed away, who was a huge scholar in the area of cognitive biases. And one of the interesting things that happened in the years before he died is he produced a book called Noise. And part of the book Noise is about problems in science in the reproducibility effect, where certain studies can't be reproduced. And I always wondered why he made a new book about this instead of revising his previous book, a book that had all kinds of problems with reproducibility. Like, why not update that book and then instead of writing a new one? In any case, I don't know why, but I thought that was kind of weird, but there apparently is no free will, so maybe that's why. In any case, we need to be adaptable because we do have biases, and science studies don't always prove reproducible, and they often turn out to be quite biased. Now, some people make the mistake of like, well, this one scientific study was biased, and therefore all of science is problematic. That's not quite the case, I would say. That's like saying, well, today the sun came up, but there were clouds, and so therefore every day there are clouds that obscure the sun. Well, probably in some part of the world that is the case, but it doesn't mean that, for the rest of where you live, that the sun is gonna be obscured by clouds. You know what I'm saying? Like, we have biases that cause us to think certain ways, and we need to be adaptable. We need to be able to think, okay, so how am I thinking? Is my thinking correct? And if I need to change it, can I change it? And what way will I change it? Artificial intelligence, it's a big field now. It's always been a big field, actually, but it's, exploded recently. But all kinds of writers are in trouble. And if writers had true breadth and depth in multiple topics, they would find it so much easier to integrate the skill of writing and turn it towards the topic of AI itself. Use AI tools much better to amplify what they're doing. This is just one example of needing to be adaptable. I've explored it myself. I mean, I know a lot about language learning. I've learned languages, but one of the first things that I did when ChatGPT came along is I just did a case study. Can ChatGPT help acquire a language? And it's been a fairly popular case study that I put together, and that was part of me practicing the depth and breadth of my writing and research skills and integrating it, being adaptable through the act of integrating the skills that I already have. And, it helped grow my YouTube channel, and I want to revisit that topic in the future, and I've set the basis for doing so. And, it's clear, humans, they're going to have to become more and more adaptable over the years to come. So to develop the trait of adaptability yourself, I would suggest getting a solid mix of brain exercises going so that your mind is sharper. It's able to turn on a dime when you need to. But it's not just about your mind. It's not just about your brain. Get your physical exercise going. Eat the best possible foods for memory and brain health. And complete substantial learning goals. Make no mistake, completing goals is a key to developing adaptability. If you've established a pattern of dabbling and never completing what you start, it won't matter how broad your interests are. You'll be lacking in depth, and you'll have nothing to integrate into the flows and intensities of whatever the future might bring. So start setting projects and completing them, even if you don't feel like it. That's where developing massive curiosity on demand is so key. And part of being able to do that is mental control, having a victorious mind. So if you really want that, that's what we're going to be doing, and it's going to have guided exercises, worksheets, all kinds of meetings over the 5 weeks. Well, 5 meetings anyway, not all kinds, but you may meet with other people who are in the cohort if you wish. And we're going to make this happen. I'm going to do all that I can. So if you're interested in that, make sure to go to magneticmemorymethod.com/VML for Victorious Mind Live and register your interest so that you get advance notice. And that there's a spot there for you, and you'll get my free guided meditation, which is my Happy Memory Palace meditation. I know you're going to love it because not only will it give you more mental space so that you're able to complete projects and become more adaptable because you have the experience that completion brings, well, you're also just going to feel happier. It's amazing how well the Happy Memory Palace technique works. I use it all the time because, let's face it, I'm still alive. Life is hard, and I absolutely do not like sitting around suffering. So what I do is I do exercises, and I am adaptable. So this is a huge part of being a polymath, because if you can't adapt to circumstances, get back on your feet when you fall down, etc., how are you going to master multiple topics? You need to have that sort of mental strength, or what I think of as having a victorious mind that just keeps coming. Boom, boom, boom. Here comes the obstacle. I will make the obstacle the way, as they say. But more than make it the way, you're going to also have so much clarity in your mind that you can see obstacles before they happen and just completely avoid them. Very, very powerful skill to have. Okay, so one of the obvious weaknesses of trying to become a polymath is becoming a jack of all trades, master of none, right? And in a previous piece that I put together about being a polymath, someone commented on the video, "You're not a polymath." Well, truly, how does some dude on the internet know what I am? I mean, this is one of those guys with an anonymous screen name, and there's no way for me to Google search him and see what basis he's judging me from. Because if it is someone who has more polymathic skills than I am, then hey, maybe he's right. But I have no way of telling, right? This is that scientific curiosity principle coming together where I can't do research on him. So, how am I supposed to take his criticism seriously? But we often get hung up in criticism. I didn't get hung up in this particular criticism. But the reason why I'm mentioning it is because it is a trap. So many people, they dabble and they don't realize they're dabbling. They think they're becoming a master of multiple topics when they're not even really becoming a jack of all trades. They're far from it. They're just engaged in a lot of activity that is not leading to accomplishment. So one of the first things to do is just acknowledge that. If people criticize you, they might be right, but then get scientific about it. On what basis might they be right? How could I find out? Anonymous username, I don't know. Like, he could be the best polymath in the world, but I have no way of doing anything with that. So it's not falsifiable, or it doesn't have falsifiability. It's not falsifiable. So I can't do anything with it. But to ensure that the critics aren't correct and that you are a true polymath, basically here's what I would suggest. It's kind of like a protocol, and I would get journaling going. I've done a lot on journaling on the Magnetic Memory Method blog and the podcast. I've had Johannes Malo, one of the most impressive memory athletes and memory experts out there. He talks about journaling. And if I boil my thoughts down together with his, and I've learned a lot from him and done this myself, is you want to craft a vision of success that's worth pursuing in the first place. And that vision should include the variety of topics you want to master. Then you need to break the goals down into achievable milestones. Then you need to document it in your journal and then analyze your performance. And then you got to optimize how you develop your skills and knowledge over time based on the analysis. And once you've got this basic protocol in place, then you want to use accelerated learning techniques properly. So what are accelerated learning techniques and how do we use them properly? Well, how to be a polymath in terms of this contemporary world, it really is this simple. You have the worthy vision, you're tracking everything with a journal, you're looking for ways to optimize your progress, and you hedge against the dangers of multitasking. Because I think you can multitask in a particular way, but if you're going to master anything, you're not going to get very far if you have dozens of tabs open and you're spending more time switching between the tabs than actually studying or practicing a skill that you want to master, right? So to avoid that problem, keep a study and deliberate practice schedule. Now, whether your particular topic areas involve deliberate practice, I don't know, but you probably, at the end of the day, you will have some form of deliberate practice where you're at least writing about what you're doing. You're practicing analysis through writing and thinking. So schedule that stuff. Have multiple places to study worked out in advance. So if you're interrupted in place A, you always have place B ready to go. And if place B is also noisy, go to place C, etc., etc. This is very, very important. This has been huge for my success over the years. I mean, I've had earplugs and all kinds of stuff. But at the end of the day, sometimes earplugs doesn't get rid of eye pollution because there's so many people moving around in an area. So I've always had another place to go. It's been very, very important because when you have your time scheduled, you need to make use of it. So I talked about this before on the podcast many times. I used to call it road work, especially when I lived in Berlin. Just moved from one cafe to the next. And that helped a lot, having all those destinations worked out in advance. Now, I highly recommend it as part of your lifelong journey. You have at least one mentor. Because if you want to be a lifelong learner, it's really unlikely that you'll be able to do it on your own. I mentioned Alexander the Great before. He had Aristotle. Just about everybody is connected with somebody else. Very few people do it on their own. So think about getting yourself a mentor, and like a real mentor, someone you actually talk to. There's all kinds of mentors for sure, for free on podcasts and yada, yada, yada. But really having someone where you have long-term feedback, meetings with them, to monitor your progress, share challenges, etc. The whole idea of the mentor, though, is that they're ahead of you. They've accomplished what you want to accomplish. So, select them carefully, figure out who they're going to be, make them an offer they can't refuse, and help them in advance sometimes helps, and just spend time with them. And you'll be able to pick up many more things with depth and breadth, and they'll help you integrate them. And part of the integration will happen through your relationship with the mentor. Now, I highly recommend that you use interleaving to promote better memory and avoid topic exhaustion. Interleaving is a whole big topic unto itself. So, search magneticmemorymethod.com for details on interleaving. From my perspective, there's other people who talk about it in different ways. I think you'll appreciate the way I talk about it, and it'll help you master a variety of tools and get through a lot more books than you would otherwise if you use interleaving in a particular way. Now, in terms of mastering the tools of accelerated learning, you've got the memory palace technique. You've got what I would suggest is an optimized way of using flashcards, not any sort of namby-pamby, Mickey Mouse kind of way of using flashcards. You really want to optimize how you use them in order to get the most of them, because you can use them in combination with memory palace technique, or even if you're not using the memory palace technique, you can still optimize them for maximum outcomes in a very short period of time. Please, please, please make sure you understand the options that you have there. Then you want mnemonic systems for remembering numbers, like the major system, a PAO, ideally a 00 to 99 PAO. And there's more, but really you want to avoid rote learning at all costs because it's boring and it's tedious, and it can work, but it's really not ideal. So you want a spaced repetition system so that when you're using flashcards and when you're using the memory palace technique, you're not just doing another form of rote learning, but you're actually using spaced repetition in order to reduce the amount of reps that you need to do to develop long-term memory faster. Then beyond that, you just need to keep in mind these principles of polymathy: breadth, depth, integration. And nobody can really tell you what those are, although many, many people can test you. And then you can satisfy yourself, whether you've passed those tests sufficiently or not. But in terms of benchmarks, one thing that I've really benefited from and talked about a lot is the Freedom Journal. I dragged one with me all over Europe on my honeymoon to make sure I got one of my projects done. In this case, it was an initiative I felt some resistance around, but I had the constant urge to get it off my bucket list, and I couldn't get it off my mind. So I took this Freedom Journal around, and I got the project done. And many people have benefited ever since, and I'm very, very glad about that. And it wouldn't have happened if I hadn't gotten it done. And, I have these things, like new projects come to my mind, like the Memory Detective novel series, and I just have to keep getting it off my plate because it keeps coming to mind until it gets done. So those are benchmarks, and I break them down as goals. Like I had to learn how to write the Memory Detective novel, so I went and studied what's involved in an advanced plot and all that sort of stuff, and I developed breadth, and I developed some depth into it, and it's been a huge success because I integrated all my skills as a former film studies professor and everything I know about philosophy and everything I know about writing, etc., etc. And that's cool. It's kind of like proof of concept. Like if I some dude on the internet with a no name is going to say, oh, you're not a polymath. I'm going to say, well, where's your novel that, is available on the market that people are reading and emailing you about on a weekly basis? Where's your business on the internet or on the street where, you are doing it successfully for 12 years or whatever is the statistical thing? I mean, I'm 12 years now. I've broken the statistics of the 5 years business fails and the 10 years business fails. I'm just in that success bracket. Knock on wood that it keeps going, because I'd love to be doing this for the rest of my days. But only you can really measure how you're going to do your accomplishments, unless you want to have external forces measure you on your behalf. So some of my friends have done this, like Nelson Dellis and Dave Farrow. They both have established Guinness World Records, for example. And I'm not really interested in memory competition. I'm interested in the fact that there is memory competition, but I've competed and I'm just not that interested in building my skills for short-term accomplishments. I want to memorize stuff and then hold it in memory forever. And that's what I work on. And it's been very, very successful. But I created that benchmark for myself. And then, another thing that I'm doing right now, I don't know how it's going to play out, but I'm drafting a book chapter. I've had it accepted for a scholarly book on memory and the senses. And that is a benchmark. I mean, whether they accept it for the final book or not, I don't know. But if it is accepted, well, then I've had an external validation, not just that I'm some guy who does memory on the internet, but also, and I talk about how I am some guy on the internet who does memory, but like I actually have credentials. It would be my first scientific publication in memory science, which would be cool. It's not going to really help my work on the internet, I don't think, but it is a way of getting external validation that here, yes, you have these credentials and so forth. I mean, I belong to certain psychological associations, which is part of that external validation. You don't get to be involved in these if you don't have a PhD and blah, blah, blah. But the point is you need to benchmark that yourself. I test my learning daily on the internet through the memory improvement work that I do, my copywriting skills, my skills as a presenter. My TEDx talk has millions of views, which demonstrates the integration of my ability to craft a message, to memorize the message, to deliver the message in such a way that humans find it engaging enough to hit the thumbs up enough times that it gets boosted by the algorithms, and many, many people see it, and I get emails about it every single week ever since that it went live. So those are external benchmarks, and you have to figure out what they are for you. And I would consider making it a lifelong habit of figuring out what those external benchmarks are going to be. And they don't always have to be in one topic area. And that's part of the reason why I did the memory detective novels. I didn't want to be a one-trick pony in memory. It's part of the reason why I submitted the proposal for a book chapter and am going to submit the finished book chapter for a scholarly book on memory. Is I don't want to be this one-trick pony that just does the internet thing. Now, it's all in memory, but memory science and memory techniques, those are slightly different areas. Novels about memory, that's yet another area. And I'm doing the Memory Detective Junior books and on and on and on. And I'm just pushing it out into different areas of skill. They all have memory at the hip, connected in a very, very detailed way, of course, to memory. But that's a philosophical puzzle. That's a philosophical question. Tell me one thing in which memory is not the central foundational strata upon which it is all built. Or foundation that is split into different strata, I guess, is probably the better way to think about it. At the end of the day, becoming a polymath is about being more successful as a contributor to the human species in the here and now. If you're doing it for your ego, you might succeed, but you'll be dead eventually. And then why would you have done anything for your ego when you could just enjoy being a contributor now? Be part of the game. You just be more fit physically and mentally right now and master multiple topics by putting the time together to learn them, to use the tools that are available, to learn and grow now. And that's ultimately what the best employers are looking for. They're looking for highly qualified people who have breadth and depth of knowledge, and they can integrate that into helping their enterprises grow. Such people are in demand in every area, from artificial intelligence and medicine to education and the arts. and to prepare yourself for success in whatever field you choose to focus on. Memory is the foundation that you will want to focus on above all things. That's because memory is like this kind of series of engines that help store and deliver your knowledge and skills. So if you'd like it to be better, make sure and visit me at magneticmarymethod.com. And if you have worries that you just don't have the processing power, you don't have the focus, you don't have the concentration yet that you need, make sure that you at least register your interest for Victorious Mind Live at magneticmarymethod.com/Victorious Mind Live, because we're going to go deep on how exactly you can condition and in some cases recondition your mind so that all of these polymathic personality traits, not only can you find them, but you're able to nurture them and amplify them. So I hope you're nodding your head, yes, I want to be able to do this, because I know that you're capable of leading a truly amazing life. All it really takes at the end of the day is a bit of strategy, continually exposing yourself to positive, encouraging information that prompts you to take action, and equip yourself with the tools that are going to help you develop depth and breadth and the ability to integrate, and study what you've integrated so that you have more reflective thinking. And that itself, as you reflect on what you've done, will give you more depth and breadth and more to integrate. So it's a perfect circle in each and every way. Thank you so much for joining me on this episode of the Magnetic Memory Method podcast. Until we have a chance to speak again, get out there and nurture and amplify your traits and keep yourself magnetic.